I have my notes on what I wanted to talk about today, but what I really want to talk about now is to clear up an argument that I was overhearing while I was sitting here about why, not to embarrass you, but why does Road to Perdition belong in the mystery category? Because there's no mysteries in it, and the answer, of course, is well, you have to call it something. You have to categorize your books so that people can find them in libraries. And that's it. That's, crime drama is a subset of mystery, and procedurals are a subset of mystery. So just so you can find it in the library, even though you won't find it in the library because they'll look in mysteries and it'll be in comic books. So there you go. Mystery solved. I understand that one of the classes taught here, or one of the areas of classes taught here, is the history of comics. And I wanted to question the teacher beforehand about how far in depth she goes into that, because my history of comics, which I'm going to start with here, is usually a little bit different, a little bit more inclusive than what is generally recognized. My history of comics, which of course is like the world's history of comics, my recognition of when comics began is the same as doing a talk on the entire history of civilization, which we're going to do here, but relax, it's only going to take a couple of minutes. About 40,000 years ago, probably before that, because 40,000 years is about the latest ones we've discovered so far. Mankind, such as we were drawing a lot on caves. We were drawing animal pictures and depictions of hunts and whatnot all over the deep caves that we've been discovering in the last century or so. And we find out that which was a pretty wonderful discovery, is that we've been doing these kinds of things long before what was generally considered to be the civilized part of mankind, long before we considered man to be intelligent enough to do things like, draw pictures on caves, for example. And we've found that the oldest date back to about 40,000 years now, and they've been going strong since, that any human civilization anywhere did this. We're finding caves in every continent, every country, any place where mankind is known to have settled at any time. They started scribbling on stuff. There's some debate going on amongst the intelligentsia, the scientists and the archaeologists and the learned but uncredentialed busybodies that join in on any type of thing like that, as to what the reasons for these drawings were. Were they spiritual? Were they magic rituals? The argument for that is that, they were put in these caves. They were put in these remote places far away from where you would get normal human traffic, and usually up high to where it would be hard to get. So because of that, because they were kind of cloistered away, then it must be some kind of sacred, magical thing that you bring people in for some kind of exposure to it under very rare and organized conditions. Applying Occam's razor, though, we have to consider that maybe they weren't just put in these hard-to-reach places. That the reason we have some of them still existing is because some of them got into these hard-to-reach places and weren't rubbed off by just the messiness of human activity over a course of 40,000 years. I suspect more than just placing them in these isolated things, that mankind, because we could not have been so different now as we are then as we are today, that we drew on everything. We drew on everything that happened to be at hand, and this is what survived because it was out of the way and hard to get to. Some people think they were histories. This was the big important hunt that we just had, and that's backed up by the fact that some of these drawings show things like, a big bison just stomping the bloody hell out of a hunter, while his friends with their sticks are trying to make the bison stop stomping, their friend the hunter. If they were religious and ritual in nature, if they were simply saying, here, we're doing this so that we get a good hunt, unless there were some really, really wicked cave artists, priesty types that said, well, we want a good hunt, but also I want, that one guy, Og, who's been eyeing up my girlfriend, to get the crap stomped out of him too. So if we could have that too as part of this ritual, that would just be spiffy, you whatever gods exist. So maybe it's history. It's like, this is the story of the big hunt that we had, and Og got a little stomped up. Or one of my favorite theories on what these might be, and I curse myself for my bad management in not keeping the article that proposed this, so I can't say who preferred it. It wasn't me. I'm not that smart. But he says, well, what if they're calendars? What if this is the season when the buffalo is running in big herds, followed by the season of the swiftly flowing river, followed by the season of the elk migration, and that kind of holds up too, because there's indications of that. But then there's also things like just a lot of people spritzing paint around their hands so that it leaves a recording of their handprint on the wall, which, if anything, other than kids playing around or grown-up artists playing around, is just an indication of I was here. At this point, this was me, I was here. My point, well, there's 2 points. The first doesn't matter because it's about bakery products. But the second point is that it doesn't matter why they did this. Of course it matters, but it doesn't matter here today. Because I would like to talk about what they are. My guess is, just as a layman, that it's probably all those things. Because it's the tendency of people that if they have a way to write down their thoughts, that their thoughts are not just canalized into one area. We will strictly only do pictures about this. As many of you might be in a position to guess, is like you have lots of ideas about lots of stuff, and you tend to put them all down. So there probably was religious, and it probably was history, and it probably was calendars, and it was probably just, trendy cave artists dicking around, as we do now. But what they are, without question, is graphic images put in a sequence to tell a story, which by any definition is comic books. The very first written language of humankind was comic books. And for 35,000 years, that was the only written language of humankind. The first alphabet distinguished from pictograms, came along at about 1600 BC, which means they've been around for nearly 4,000 years. Alphabets are symbols that indicate the sounds we're capable of making rather than pictures telling the story in a sequence. Hieroglyphs, all that was pictures in a sequence. We show the woman, we show the god, we show the whatever to tell the story. We switched to alphabets about 4,000 years ago to symbolically indicate these are the sounds we're making. Alphabets are servants to the spoken language. Comic books, the first language of mankind, aren't. They're their own thing. As a matter of fact, they're the only universal language. We'll get back to that. So, what they are, what the language of mankind is doing comic books. They weren't on paper then. I don't think that matters. They were on cave walls. Now we're in a time in our technology when comic books are, as often as not, have nothing to do with paper as way back then. Now they can be digital every bit as much as paper. It really doesn't matter what you put them on. To tell stories in comics, you put graphic images in a sequence to tell a story. Every civilization that has ever existed is built on that language, because that was the way we recorded things for later use, for later reference. We were the first scripture, we were the first history, we were the first science, we were the first just telling of tall tales, maybe even the first court records. Maybe the whole thing about the buffalo and Og getting stomped to death was because his best friend Reginald did not run up and stick the guy when he was supposed to, and this is what happens, and this was the official court record. We don't know that. We just know that the language in which this was put down is a language in which you folks are working right now, and the only universal language. What I mean by that is tell an uneducated guy, an unlettered, not dumb, but illiterate, just had no education, put a bunch of letters or letter combinations up there and ask him to pick out, all right, which of those letter combinations represents the sound ah? It's a pretty common one. And he'd just look at you with a blank stare at best and say you're some kind of idiot at worst and stomp out and go to lunch. But there's nothing within the letter forms that absolutely indicate that sound you've made. There's no connection other than the ones we provided and hammered into you for 20 years. Your first 20 years of life is just getting that crap down. Is like, oh, that's got it, I understand. Take the same guy, same lack of any training or education, and put up a couple of pictograms and tell him to pick out which of the stick figures shows a man as opposed to which shows the buffalo. He's going to pick it out every time, because we do not need to learn the language of comic books, the basic language, which is pictures in our head. We may need to work a bit to get sequencing right. Since we're a left to right reading culture, we may need to get kind of that down as opposed to those cultures that go right to left or up to down or down to up. But that's something that you could sit someone down and do a good how to read a comic book lesson in about 10 minutes. The pictures you can figure out for yourself. Tom, the illiterate I was talking about, who lives down the road from me, but that's a whole different thing. Just, Tom, here's how you do it. You start here, you go across the page, then you go to the next layer and go that. Once he's got the sequence down, and that's it. That is the lesson on how to read comics. The rest he can kind of figure out for himself, providing the pictures are there telling the bulk of the story. And we'll talk about that a little bit, because now comics are also, in addition to pictures and a sequence to tell a story, we're adding some words too. You've probably had it hammered into you that if you can't tell what the story is in comics without the words, substantially tell, then your drawing isn't doing its job of storytelling enough. Have they covered this kind of stuff? Does anyone? Okay, thank you. What I mean by that is the pictures carry the bulk of telling the story. You know this, right? Does anyone disagree with that? Okay, you're very kind. You add the words, but the pictures tell the story, and that is the absolute unchangeable language of humankind. You pick up a comic book in any other culture, and you may have to catch on to they're going left to right. They're turning the pages this way. But that's just a glitch of learning how they've packaged it. You pick the comic of any other culture, you can see what's going on. You might not be able to read the word balloons, but remember that's prose, that's based on alphabets, that's this Johnny newcomer to storytelling. but you're going to be able to follow the story. Any culture at all, including people who've never seen a formal comic book or what we call a comic book in their lives, are still going to be able to pick out pictures of men or whomever doing things in a sequence and figure it out. There's a reason I'm telling you this. One, just in case your teacher didn't cover this in comics history, that just please tell her that she's got about 35,000 years more of work to do before next class. But there's another reason on why we're settling this. We also know that comic books, graphic images, placed in a sequence to tell a story, are the only language that we can count on in the future. That's why when we do things like lock away our nuclear waste material in these vaults that have to last 40,000 years before they're safe to open, the messages we put on those vaults saying, stay out of here or you're going to die, is done entirely in pictograms, because we have no guarantee what languages are going to be spoken then, what languages are going to be written then, even if, maybe this flirtation with prose literacy is just a trendy little blip on our historical timeline. We don't know, but we do know that whoever they are, if they're human, if they're descended from us, they will be able to know how to decipher pictures in a sequence to tell a story. So comics are the first written language. They're a powerful, universal written language now, and they're the only language we can count on in the future. I told you all of that to tell you this. First of all, something I'm going to hit on is the purpose of comics is to tell stories. I would love to hear if, and by the way, when I'm done yakking, I'd love to take some Q&A. So if you have anything about the comics medium that you're interested in asking, start girding yourself with that question now. Comic book illustration, which is it's a term I almost hate. Drawing comics, doing comics, cartooning are better terms, and here's why. Do you guys have classes in illustration, like book illustration here? Are there book illustrators in the audience? I'm about to insult you all, so I want to know where the missiles are coming from when they. No, I'm not going to insult you all, but I'm going to perhaps give you a different definition than what you may have been given. The purpose of drawing comics is to tell stories. Illustrators do not have that definite requirement to this extent. Yes, if you're an illustrator of a story, you should illustrate the story. You shouldn't lie to the readership. If the story is about Heathcliff and what's her name out on the moors having love and rippy parts with their vests and things, you shouldn't be drawing a lot of robots fighting alien invaders. Probably a little misleading. So yes, you tell the story with the illustrations, but a good illustrated novel, you should be able to remove the illustrations and still get the gist of the story by the text left behind. If you can do that with a comic book, you've failed. You've broken the comic book engine. If you remove the illustrations, the drawings, the pictures, the what have you of comic books, leaving just whatever text is behind, it should be an indecipherable mess. The reason being that in comics, the art carries the biggest weight of storytelling, obviously. It's the exposition. Anything short of dialogue is there in the pictures. You don't have to say the castle on the hill, you have to show the castle on the hill. You don't describe the intricacies of the sword fight or the tank battle or the space battle, you show it. Do it in the pictures, then the dialogue and captioning, if there is, their narration can be short and sweet. That wasn't always so. Back when the people running comics, about the time I entered the business, which was 30 years ago, the standard was very much treat your audience like idiots. If you have Spider-Man swinging through the window into the building, you would show that. You'd show that in the panel. Then you would have a caption saying, as Spider-Man swings through the window into the building. But because our readership was even more moronic than that, it would also help to have a fellow in that office say, I can't help but notice that Spider-Man just swung in through the window into the building. And it really was the standard, the triple punch. The show it, tell it, have someone describe it in their dialogue. And it really made, for bad comic storytelling, because you didn't need any of that. You could have done the same panel, just in the pictures, and since you have that guy standing there anyway, you could have had him do something else than saying, I can't help but notice that you swung into the building. You can even counterweight that little bit of storytelling by say, well, Spider-Man, I can't help but think that this is an imposition on my private space, the fact that you just come in. And then you have not just a raw description of what's going on, but you have a little bit of conflict building up, and therein is your story. That was the standard then, and we're kind of better than that now. Not in every case. I mean, there are many ways, and there are many expertise in doing comics as there are people doing them. But we've gotten a little better. Which brings me back to the reason I did all the stuff about the 40,000-year boring history of comics is that until your generation of comic artists, we were considered a pretty trashy gutter literature. We were the back of the bus, idiot deformed cousin kept locked up during the fancy dinner parties when the great banquets of literacy were assembled. Best to keep them out of sight and out of mind. Not entirely undeserved, because, like I said, the state of comics art was the triple punch of just endlessly reiterating that the guy in the tights is coming into the window. That's not the case anymore. When I first broke into comics, comics were never in libraries. As a matter of fact, many librarians that I came across would state with all certainty that comics will never break into the hallowed halls of libraries. That will just not be allowed to happen, and it's nice. Now, everyone can make bad pronouncements about history. I stood with my friends at the Berlin Wall back when I was in the Army and stated this will never come down in our lifetime, and it turns out I was wrong. So we make a lot of silly statements about the forces of history that don't turn out to be the same, don't turn out to be so. We are in the libraries, and as a matter of fact, we went from being we're never allowed here to dirty up this place to the princes of the city, because as everyone who's in library science has known, the coin of realm in libraries are circulation figures, and comics just circulate like mad. I mean, they're a fairly quick read, they're exciting, they turn over and turn over and turn over. So we were the terrible men in the gutter before, now we're the welcome princes, and that's nice. We would never read comics in public during my day for fear of being considered an idiot, and comic books were shorthand for just silly, childish literature. How many times in movies or such have you heard, oh, that's comic book thinking, or that's a silly comic book idea of a story, and meaning it's bad, it's simplistic and imbecilic. That's changed now. For the most part, we still have that kind of, how many of you have done that little hesitation when someone asks, what do you do, or what are you studying? Anyone that does comic books that wants to admit that you hesitated a little bit before you said, Well, I write and draw comics. Anyone want to fess up? Yeah, yeah. How many of you like the fact that we call them graphic novels now, just because at least that doesn't sound so immature? Yeah. I hate the term graphic novel, only because it is. We're desperately trying to sound grown up by using it. It's like, if I say graphic novel, I'm not admitting to comic books. And I know it hurts. I mean, in my first job in just north of Chicago, I'm taking a cab back from the publishers to the airport. And I have one of those gregarious cab drivers who's going to talk about everything. I mean, everything in the world, every building we pass, what that ridiculous president is doing to our economy, whatever's on his mind. And that's fine. I like talking to gregarious people. I love talking to strangers when I can. But then he asked me what I do, and I did that little pause. And I said, well, I draw comic books. And this guy that did not shut up for 20 minutes, I mean, one 20-minute long run-on sentence, just silence for 5 minutes. I mean, just absolute dead silence. And a grim silence. You could see the way he was just holding the wheel. It was like, and I'm waiting for it and waiting for it and waiting for it. And just before he drops me off, he says, fella, that's fine. You draw your comic books. If you ever want to get married, you better learn to do something else, because no woman on earth is going to put up with that crap. That was the state of the art of comics at the time. I love that encounter, and speak about it. But it's changed now. Now it's trendy. Now Hollywood pretty much exists on the backbone. At least the big movies, the big important meaning do well at the box office movies require comic books as its R&D research feeding material. So we're enjoying a good time, but there's still that kind of smug condescension that you're you're welcome now at the important and hallowed table of literature. But sit near the end, and don't speak up much. And you're trendy for the moment. And the reason I like to point out that we are the people that built human civilization is just to kind of circumvent that kind of smug condescension. So I'm hoping that the next time you get a little bit of that, you'll give them that example. You will let them know that Jane Austen could not have written. See, now I had the quote down. I did not need to write it down because I have it. I have it here. That it is. Give me the quote. It is the. Okay, I failed you. I'm ashamed. The thing about gentlemen and good fortune, it is the nature of gentlemen and good fortune to seek a wife. Yeah, I did that well. She could not have written that. If not, Og of the Great Spear that we've met before, coming back from the hunt, didn't first write the story of that hunt in 2 or 3 pictures on his cave wall. Walt Whitman could not have sung The Body Electric if Og's buddy Reginald, of the only mediocre spear, but he was excellent at throwing rocks, did not write down the story of the elk herd crossing the swiftly flowing river on his cave wall. Everything being done in storytelling now flows from what we and those of you that are doing funny books here are doing now. We probably aren't creating entire civilizations of the future at this point. Maybe we are, I don't know. But that is our story. That is our history, and that is our long I'm going to try and avoid using the word history again, and I can't. I can't get out of this. It's our long history of the written word, the written story. That's what we did for 35,000 years before the first other kind of writing word stories down came along. We've got the head of the table, that literacy banquet that we're talking about. We're sitting at the head of the table, and yes, you Johnny-come-lately novelists and writers, you're poets, you're welcome. We're not going to sort of smugly dismiss you the way we have in the past. But you are a little new at this, so maybe sit at the kids' table. But you are welcome at the banquet of literacy, which is bedrock, absolute, down to its original DNA, comic books. And thank you for that. Questions? Doesn't have to be about this. Although I would love to be challenged on this. I have a paleontologist friend who bristles at this every time I discuss it with him, and yet has not quite come back with his rebuttal yet. So feel free to challenge. But any questions at all, or comments, or what have you? Okay. Oh yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Earlier you said a distinction between illustration and comics, where that illustration does not have to cover stories. Would you not say, though, that the point of illustration is to bring the story out with words and to amplify it? You could say that illustration and comics are like two sides of the same coin. Both of them work in concert with words oftentimes.
Sure, I would say they're related. I don't know about two sides of the same coin. I think prose and pictures are two sides of the comic coin. But sure. Did I step on your question? Go ahead.
No. I mean, like, both of them work in concert with words and pictures to have these communicate an idea, is what I'm trying to say.
Right. And my point would be that if you take away the illustrations and the story does not stand up on itself, on its own legs, then you are not doing just what we can. Of course it's illustration, but I'm talking about the technical definition of story illustrator. If you can take away the pictures and the story doesn't hold up, then you aren't doing story illustration. I'm sorry, but you're doing comic books. You are doing, because if the picture is required, then this is what you're doing. But that's good. That's an inclusive thing, because I think that's the better house to be in. I love story illustrators, and you're right. If they're doing the work well, they are also telling the story. Every story is a collaboration between the writer or the artist, or the writer and artist, or the playwright and the actors, or the movie makers. It's a collaboration between them and the audience, or the readership. The story is never told fully until it's received and rewritten by the receiver. For example, you've come across, I think I use it as a reference, in prose, there was a city on the hill. Now, there's no novel in the world that's going to keep its readership if the novelist decides, well, I've just put a city up on a hill. I am now constrained to describe every person in it, every street, every mailbox, to fully describe that fictional city I've created. That's not his job. As a matter of fact, you start into that nonsense, your reader is gone. You say there's a city on the hill, and you place as much action or importance in that as you need to, but you move on, because it's the reader's job to build the whole damn city. And he's great at it. He's fine. He's like, okay, it's a big city. It's a medieval thing, so it's probably made of stone or whatever. Anything that the reader needs that city to be, that's his part of the collaboration. The the illustrator of a story that already exists is just taking one of those first steps in that. It's like, if there's through the woods, you spy a cottage in the woods, and the illustrator will put it down. Oh, okay, it's this type. It's this, and there's the deer that was described running through the forest, or what have you. Sort of placing that in a more concrete. Here's a better description of those things. So it's placing more information in a way that you can quickly do it without being bogged down and move on. So you can indeed help tell the story that way. You're still not telling the entire story because it's still up to the reader to take that one static picture and provide the movement and what happened just preceding it and what happened immediately following it. And every story is like that. In the entire debate of who really wrote the complete works of Shakespeare, has anyone heard about all this nonsense? All the people saying it couldn't have been Shakespeare? Well, it was Shakespeare, but it was me too. I also wrote the complete works of Shakespeare because the stories did not take place entirely until I'd thrown in my part. Hamlet performed on a bare stage. I was more than willing to provide the castles and the staircases and the elaborate costumes and the forests of burning wood and all of that. No, I'm sorry, that's Macbeth. But I was willing to provide all the extra stuff as my part of the collaboration. That's also the nature of storytelling. I would probably arrogantly say that one of the advantages of illustration or comics is you're providing a little better example of your half of the work than simply the prose writer. The prose writer has a tough row to hoe because nothing can bog down a story like lots and lots and lots of bad exposition dumped right in the middle of things. The comic writer does not have to deal with that. The artist side of it, whether you're the artist and writer both or two different people, always provides those expositional lumps in ways that are hopefully delightful and easy to take in and immediate. Other questions? Yes, sir?
So in your thesis, so everything comes out of comics, right? But then where does art come from? Why did art sort of take this at least in Western civilization, take this super high art, so high that when comics as we know them today resurface in little, printed books in the 20th century, whatever, they became this thing that was not art. This was the lowest end. Why did that concept in your sort of
Are you talking like capital A art, like fine arts and things like that? That's a good question. I think that was always with us, and I think there's probably as many motivations for how that spun off of things. I'm certain, even in the cave paintings, when they're like I said, using the images in sequence to tell things, couldn't have occurred before. Og's great grandfather showed, I know I can paint a picture of a buffalo. Look what I can do. And it was just a skill. It was a self-standing work of art that someone else said, that is a great way to mark down these oral stories that we've been forgetting. So it probably proceeded and was hand in hand. And even though they've said all along that the best art does tell a story, I don't think that's essential to fine art. I think fine art can accomplish things entirely divorced from a story, that it exists as its own justification, or it exists so that when someone comes over and looks at your painting and says, "What does that mean?" You can say snooty things like, "Well, you've got to figure that out for yourself," or all that, which I've never liked in fine. How many fine artists have I just insulted here? I just for the record. Okay. Yeah, sorry about that, but all right. Fine art, great. Not comics, but okay. Anyone else? Yes, sir?
I just wanted you, or if you could speak for a moment, you spoke a lot about like comics and the form it takes, and I know in your career you've been both like an artist, you've drawn the comics and you've written the comics.
Yes.
And I know for Fables, you've been primarily just the writer, correct?
Yes, because I've gotten very old and very lazy.
With the whole visual storytelling thing, I wonder if it's, I guess I just wanted you to speak a little bit to that, since now it is, you know, you have to tell the story visually. Like, how do you come at that as a writer, just, you know, working with the written word and trying to get, do you think that's because of your intimate knowledge of the way it works as an artist?
Well, I hope it helps. It's comics is its own medium. It's very similar to playwriting. It's very similar to writing movie scripts, but by all means not the same. As a matter of fact, many a Hollywood screenwriter, now that it's trendy for, it used to be that everyone who wrote comics wanted to break into movies someday, and now that door is going both ways, that movie people are trying to break into comics. But they find out that it's very different from writing screenplays. It is its own language. And so to have been and continue very slowly and intermittently to draw comics as well as write is helpful, especially in the sense of working with another artist. I know all of the things that I as a writer cannot ask an artist to do. Comics is, as those of you who do them well know, the tersest storytelling medium of all time. You only have limited, I mean, it's tough to draw a page of comics, and the really tough part is you spend a day doing that, and tomorrow you have to start all over again and do it again and again and again, and that's the rest of your life. It is really, really tough. It's a tough storytelling medium. And you don't get a lot of extra room to waste. I mean, if you are determined to spend 30 pages, 5 panels each, of showing every detail of how Bob excuses himself and goes to the men's room and does his business, I suppose you could, but that's going to be a tedious long haul and probably not necessary. This is a language in which you pare things down to its most basic elements. So as a writer, to get around to answering your question, the best I can do as having been and continuing to be an artist too, is I don't call for things that you should not or cannot show. Many a first-time comics writer will come in and do things like the man pulls out a gun, shoots the bad guy rolls behind the Ford, pulls his own gun and comes up shooting. And that's one panel in an entire comic, and then you have to carefully explain to the fellow, you can't show all of that in one panel because it's actually a single, even though we miraculously sort of give the illusion that we're showing motion by having these multiple panels in sequence, you actually do that with static pictures. You can't show all of that in a single panel. Nor can you load it up with the, page 1, panel 1 of 9 panels on that page. 2 vast armies go rushing down the hills on their horses, clashing into each other. People dying, corpses littering the battlefield. But it's very important that the hilt of one sword in the one general's hand have this very recognizable inscription on it. And all of this is being seen in a crystal ball that is in the wizard's tower. You can't put all of that in a single panel, obviously. That is not much of an exaggeration of some of the stuff that has been called for by first-time comic writers. So the best thing I can do as a fellow who primarily writes comic books now, working with some wonderful artists, is to avoid asking for things like that just cannot be done. To know how the visual symmetry of a comic book panel and a comic book page works best. And as a result, sometimes I'm maybe too careful that way because even though everyone knows that those people who draw comics are the laziest bastards in history that get away with drawing as little as possible. I've actually had some of the artists I work with add more panels and more detail than I asked for just because they have a better way to tell that story. And I guess that's an indication that I'm doing it right, at least in the case of not calling for more than than an artist could or should attempt to deliver. Did I answer your question at all in there? Okay, all right. Anything else? Yes, sir, way back there. I think it's pretty absolute. I'm dying to ask you what more than storytelling is the lot more you think they can do. I'm a poor man, so I'm not going to do something silly like say I've got $20 for the first person that can tell me an analogy that isn't also a story. But I would be impressed with anyone that could tell me an analogy that isn't also a story. Are we just arguing semantics that maybe I have a broader definition of what storytelling is than you're saying? Okay. Certainly traditional in sequence, in chronological sequence narrative is not the only way you can tell a story, and not even tell a narrative story. You can go way out of sequence, and you can go into all sorts of areas that would defy easy categorization as, oh, here's a narrative of just events happening. I'd still have to say, I don't think I could give you a totally comprehensive definition of storytelling to save my life, or at least to save our afternoon. But it's certainly in the know it when you see it category. And being, having top 50 so that I have my allowed to be a grumpy old fart credentials here, I can certainly point out sort of self-indulgent, navel-gazing nonsense when I see that as well. And I think that is sort of, once again, though, I'm not saying it's not storytelling. It's just bad storytelling. Yes. Sure. I don't know. I guess I'd have to. The question was if you have an experimental comic that just shows sequences of a forest. Now, if you're showing sequences in time, I'm sorry, you're telling the story of the forest over time. If you're just showing sequences of here are different parts of the forest, then you're telling the story of, oh, look at this tour through the forest. It's hard to escape telling a story once you start placing images in the sequence. It's almost an impossible thing to do that and not tell some kind of a story with it. Now, good story, bad story, that's for people to argue over on whether or not it's interesting, but you are. Okay. Sure. Yeah, the single image cartoon gag thing. Yeah. It's very inclusive. What? You take that one issue sight gag thing with, it doesn't even have a word balloon, it's got the quotation underneath. No, but I'm giving you the example. It's like if you take that, remove the picture, and you still get a funny joke with the whatever's written underneath, then you have an illustrated story as opposed to. I mean and maybe you want to argue that the line shouldn't be divided there. That's why divide it. Is an illustrator, the story can the prose, the words can stand on their own. If they can't, if you need the picture, or if the picture is all that's there and it tells a funny story or a tragic or whatever, that's a comic book. And that's just where I draw the line. Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk a little bit about the distinction of the different types of storytelling from the writer's perspective versus the artist's perspective, and where you think the responsibility for clarity falls?
Wow. See, I could have gotten away with a snarky answer right until that last bit. The responsibility for clarity. I think 90% it's on the artist. Not in a fairness thing. I don't think, just in a structural definition of that, if the story's not told in the pictures, if the writer has to overcome the pictures and explain them, and so which I've had to do many times. Some of the stuff is done. It's ground out like sausages from, the big companies, Marvel and DC, that have to produce 7 different issues of Spider-Man or Batman or what have you every month. Some of this stuff is just assembly line constructed, soulless stuff. And you will occasionally have things like has happened to me, which is I wrote a script that very carefully called for what needed to be in each panel, got the art back, which was anything but what we called for, even to the extent of having to get studio mates around to try and guess like what the second panel on that page is a picture of. It's either cars going down a freeway or a close-up of someone's shoe. That is not an exaggerated example. That was, we'd pared it down to one or the other maybe. When you have something like that where you have to like rewrite and add in captions to kind of like keep that going, that's just a bad, that's a failure of the system. For better or worse, the artist carries the weight, which is why a writer, and this is where I talk about, I stopped doing art primarily and write, just because a writer can do 5 or 6 books and at the same time the artist can do one, just because the drawing of a comic is a big commitment of time and energy and soul and spirit and creativity that you cannot just rush out as quickly as the writing. It's on the artist. A great artist can really save like a mediocre writer. A bad writer, I don't know, cannot and should not be saved. But the best writer in the world can't save a bad job of comic art. That's an opinion, but I think it holds up. Did I address your question there?
Then I want to ask an additional question about, I don't know, we get into a lot of legal issues about who owns what sort of creative rights.
Yes.
Specifically in the Marvel style, where it's just that general, very, very loose idea of a
Sure.
story. So, if so much responsibility is placed on the artist, where do you think that kind of those ownership rights should be?
I see where you're going there. And I'm going to try and lawyer my way out of the obvious answer. The rights for the story, and this is boy, I mean, we could do days on where the rights of the story revolve. Technically, the legal rights to any story are co-owned by whoever creates that story. They cannot, by creating the thing, the rights of it are invested in you automatically. You don't need to do a thing. The problem that happens, though, of course, is that you want these things to be published, and sometimes you go through other publishers and stuff, and they may take assignment of the rights as part of the deal. It's the shorthand for that is like work for hire, where legally the publisher is the creator of the work and has all the rights, and you are just kind of a hired gun to do it for him. That's easy to figure out because it doesn't matter if the artist or the writer should have more, because all of the rights reside with the publisher anyway. When you split the rights with an artist, the standard, if there is an industry standard, it's usually 50-50. The writer and the artist co-create it, and they split the rights. There's variations of that all over. The fair thing to do might indeed be more rights to the artist because he's putting more into it, at least the physical labor. But then who came up with the ideas, or what is it that any secondary purchaser is really after? Are they after the story? Are they after the names of the characters? I mean, sometimes I do a book called Fables that twice now has been optioned for TV shows, and 2 pilots have been written by it. Both very well written pilot episodes for a supposed Fables series. In both cases, I thought, well, these are very nice stories, but they're not. Those are not any of our characters, and they would never do that. These aren't fable stories. These are just generic stories. It was clear there what they wanted was the rights to say this is the Fables series, and then after that, they were just going to fix every bad thing that apparently Bucky and I, the artists, had done because, of course, their story was better. In a case like that where they're clearly just after the right to say this is the official book of this, and they're not going to use any of the ideas and any of the original art and designs, I don't know who should get. It's an open question that I think that needs to be resolved every time, every single time. The only caveat to that, that in anything I'm involved with, all the rights should reside with me. That was funnier in my head when. Thank you. That was a mercy laugh is welcome. But it's a snake can. It is just a book, Marvel Man, that was called. It was called Marvel Man when it first came up, but then Marvel threatened to sue them, so they had to change it to Miracle Man and all that. The rights to that were kind of gathered together. It was a revamp of an old Golden Age British character that was kind of a ripoff of Shazam, Captain Marvel. Those rights were so fragmented that to get them all together to be able to revamp them was a Herculean task. And then 20 years into the saga of starting it all up again and having it go from publisher to publisher, and other publishers got pieces of the rights here, they found out that all those original rights they bought were fabricated because the original rights owner had never released any of that. And then he finally realized all this was going around and came out of the woodwork and said, you all owe me all this money because I never released it. So all of that, it's just a terrible can of worms. I think one of the reasons that for properties I create, I tend to use public domain characters is simply because it removes a whole lot of that nonsense of the things, the draconian things you have to do to protect your rights when people freely borrow other people's story ideas. It's like, at least I can kind of carefully gauge, okay, that's just, the show Once Upon a Time. Yeah, that's kind of like Fables, but they're using this only because they're using the same public domain characters that I use, and I don't own that. I just own my versions of them. It makes it a little easier, but it's a royal mess, and it's broken many lives and many good men. Just the fights over things like that. If anyone has created a good all system solutions to it across the board, I've not met him yet. I don't think it's possible. Did that depress you? I feel a little sad right now, but, not only because of the rambling answer, but because it's a very depressing answer. Anyone else? Yes, sir. Orange T-shirt.
What initially inspired you to use comics as a story?
What initially inspired? Early on, I was raised an Army brat, and I am the second to youngest of a household of 8. I had five older sisters. They, in the Army, back in my days, we traveled without TV or things like that. Growing up that way is kind of boring, but with that many older sisters, it was easy to talk them into reading to me, and comics were kind of short and, you know, done in one kind of things as opposed to books. So I suppose they got good to me that way, just because they were, you know, a big part of my life as a kid. Back when I was a kid, comics were everywhere. They weren't just in little niche markets. I mean, they were everywhere. So they were always around. I guess I had a talent for drawing, you know. So, but drawing to tell stories with it, as opposed to, I've never been a good enough artist to just like do pretty pictures that stand on their own. I think it was a combination of all of that. Plus, I told a lot of lies as a kid, and this is one of the few decent professions you can go into. You know, this or politics, as far as good line, and politics is just too unsavory for me. Did I answer your question there? Okay. It's not an exciting story. Anything else? I think we're all right. One more. This is good. Not to put any pressure, but I think this is a good time to wrap it up. So your question should be the prince, the creme de la creme of all questions now.
As a writer, do you think that there are stories that most people can hunt for, or as opposed to say prose or film, or all stories kind of universal?
I wouldn't go so far as to say only, but certainly best. I mean, one of the things I did with Fables is there was a story that was going to be too long and complex for a comic, and only just for the. I told one Fable story that went on for 12 issues, and halfway through had the editor, the publisher screaming at me like, "When are you going to wrap this up? When are you going to wrap it up?" And this would have been double that. So I did it as a novel only because that has a more robust, no limits on how long it takes you to tell the story kind of thing going for it than comics do. Comics are the language of terseness. I think one of the best inventions for comic writers is Twitter, the idea of encapsulating full thoughts into, 140 characters? Just because to write comics well, you have to be able to pare dialogue, anything down to that bare minimum, simply because of the physical space it occupies. So for that reason, for the physical length and breadth of the story, I think it worked well as a novel, which I did it then as a novel rather than comics. Comics is better when, well, obviously the best if you're just kind of a crabby storyteller that you want to control everything yourself. A novel, just because you can tell the entire story yourself. Comics, you can tell the entire story yourself if you're also the artist. If you're working with an artist, there's at least only two people really making big storytelling decisions. You get into movies and things like that, and you have hundreds of people making decisions and second guessing. And I'm surprised anything does well in filmed entertainment just because of that. Because I am an absolute advocate of a story cannot survive the mistakes of more than one person. Every story is faulty. Every story is a bunch of compromises or not nearly that perfect thing in your head once you execute it. But at least if there's one person driving the thing, I think you can overcome those kinds of mistakes. You can overcome the biases and the blind spots of a single person. You get everyone in there trying to add their 2 cents. It's got to have this and this and this and this. And it just becomes this mush of nothing. I don't think that was your original question, but yeah, I think comics are good for those that want to, in a visual medium, tell a story their own way, and can do it quickly. That was it. Thank you very much for spending the time.